Billionaire dumps maid for wealthy fiancé. What she does next will shock him. The grand chandelier cast a warm glow over the opulent living room of Alexander Sterling's penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city skyline, a glittering backdrop to the wealth and power he wielded. Dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, Alexander exuded confidence, his piercing blue eyes scanning the room as if he owned not just the space but the world itself. Sophie, the maid, stood near the doorway, clutching a tray of drinks. Her simple uniform couldn't hide her natural beauty, soft brown eyes, a gentle smile, and an air of quiet dignity that made her stand out. She had worked for Alexander for 3 years, and in that time, she had fallen for the man behind the billionaire facade. She had seen glimpses of his kindness, his vulnerability, and the way he smiled when he thought no one was watching. But tonight, something was different. Alexander's usual warmth toward her was absent, replaced by a cool detachment that sent a shiver down her spine. "Alexander, darling," a sultry voice called out. Isabella Devereaux, the wealthy socialite and Alexander's fiancée, glided into the room. Her diamond necklace sparkled as she placed a possessive hand on his arm. Isabella was everything Sophie wasn't: glamorous, commanding, and born into wealth. She looked at Sophie with thinly veiled disdain, her perfectly arched brow lifting in silent judgment. Alexander turned to Sophie, his expression unreadable. "Sophie, we need to talk," he said, his tone brisk. Sophie's heart sank. She followed him into his private study, the heavy door closing behind them. The room, with its dark wood paneling and leather armchairs, felt suddenly oppressive. "Sophie," Alexander began, his voice clipped, "I've appreciated everything you've done for me over the years. You've been loyal?" Sophie blinked, her chest tightening. "Thank you, sir," she said softly. "But," he continued, avoiding her gaze, "things are changing. Isabella and I are getting married, and it's no longer appropriate for you to stay here." The words hit her like a blow. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Alexander sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's nothing personal, Sophie. Isabella feels uncomfortable with you around, and I have to respect her wishes." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat, but she refused to cry. "I see," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "When should I leave?" "By the end of the week," Alexander said, already turning away. "I'll make sure you're compensated." As Sophie walked back to her small room to pack, tears streamed down her face. She had given her heart to Alexander, believing that he saw her for who she truly was. But in the end, she was just another employee, easily discarded and replaced. Sophie sat on the edge of her modest bed, the faint hum of the city echoing through the cracked open window. The suitcase on the floor remained untouched, her hands trembling as she clutched a framed photo of her late mother. Her mother's words echoed in her mind, "Never let anyone make you feel small, Sophie. You're worth more than you know." But tonight, Sophie didn't feel that worth. The man she had quietly loved for years had dismissed her with little more than a formal goodbye. She had dared to believe that their moments of shared laughter and the vulnerable conversations late at night meant something. But to him, it was all disposable. She was disposable. The tears came in waves, but Sophie let them fall. She needed to mourn not just the loss of her position but the loss of the dream she had dared to hold onto. By the time the sun began to rise, her sadness had given way to something stronger: resolve. Standing in front of the mirror, Sophie wiped her swollen eyes and took a deep breath. "Enough," she whispered to herself. "If he doesn't see my worth, I'll show the world instead." Sophie's life had never been easy, but it had shaped her into someone resilient and resourceful. Born in a small town, she had grown up watching her mother work tirelessly as a seamstress to make ends meet. Her mother had been her biggest inspiration, a woman who faced life's challenges with grace and determination. After her mother's passing, Sophie moved to the city with little more than a suitcase and a dream of creating a better life. She had taken the job as Alexander's maid to support herself, but she had always dreamed of something bigger. Sophie had a passion for design, spending her nights sketching dresses and imagining a future where her creations would grace the covers of magazines. But life had a way of burying dreams beneath the weight of survival. For years, she had pushed her ambitions aside, content to live quietly and unnoticed. Until now. Sophie pulled out her sketchbook, the pages filled with designs she had long abandoned. She flipped through them, her heart pounding as she rediscovered the passion she had suppressed. Maybe this was the push she needed to finally pursue her dreams. Meanwhile, Alexander's life with Isabella was far from the fairy tale he had envisioned. At first, their engagement had been a whirlwind of glamorous parties and media attention. Isabella basked in the spotlight, her dazzling smile plastered across tabloids as she flaunted her engagement ring for the cameras. But behind closed doors, cracks began to form in their relationship. Isabella's charm turned into criticism, her sweet words replaced by sharp remarks about Alexander's every decision. She demanded constant attention, berating him if he worked late or prioritized his business over her whims. "Alexander, why are you so focused on this merger?" Isabella snapped one evening as they sat in their sprawling dining room. "Do you really think I want to spend my nights alone while you bury yourself in paperwork?" Alexander sighed, rubbing his temples. "Isabella, this merger is crucial for the company. You know that?" "What I know," Isabella said, her voice icy, "is that you promised me a life of excitement, not one where I'm constantly competing with your work." Her words stung, but Alexander held his tongue. He had always prided himself on his ability to remain composed, but lately he found himself questioning his choices. He thought of Sophie and the quiet steadiness she had brought to his life. She had never demanded anything from him, just his time, his attention. And he had thrown her away for this. Over the next few months, Sophie poured herself into her work. She used the severance Alexander had provided to rent a small apartment and purchase the supplies she needed to start her business. Her days were filled with fabric shopping, late-night sewing sessions, and countless revisions to her designs. Each stitch was a reminder of her determination to succeed. Her big break came when a boutique owner noticed one of her dresses at a local market. Impressed by Sophie's talent, the owner offered to feature her designs in the store. Word spread quickly, and soon, Sophie's creations were the talk of the town. She rebranded herself as Sophie Laurent, shedding the identity of the quiet maid and stepping into her new role as a rising star in the fashion world. Her designs caught the attention of fashion influencers and celebrities, and within a year, she was invited to showcase her collection at a prestigious fashion gala. As Sophie stood backstage at the gala, watching models walk the runway in her designs, she felt a surge of pride. She had built this life with her own hands, and no one could take it from her. Alexander first heard Sophie's name during a meeting with a business associate. They were discussing a charity gala when the associate mentioned the event's headlining designer. "Sophie Laurent is debuting her collection," the associate said. "Her work is incredible, elegant yet bold. She's the one to watch." The name struck a chord with Alexander, but he dismissed it as a coincidence. It wasn't until he saw a magazine cover featuring Sophie's photo that the truth hit him. The woman he had once dismissed as a maid was now a successful designer, her name on everyone's lips. He stared at the magazine in disbelief, a mix of admiration and regret washing over him. How had he been so blind to her potential? And why couldn't he stop thinking about her? As Sophie's star rose, Isabella's true nature began to surface. Her extravagant spending habits and constant need for attention strained Alexander's finances and patience. She threw tantrums over minor inconveniences, treating the staff with disdain and demanding more than Alexander could provide. One evening, during a heated argument, Isabella crossed a line. "You're pathetic, Alexander," she spat. "You act like this great businessman, but all you care about is control. No wonder people like Sophie walk all over you." The mention of Sophie's name sent a jolt through Alexander. "Leave Sophie out of this," he said, his voice cold. Isabella laughed bitterly. "But because you still care about her? Face it, Alexander, she's better off without you. And honestly, so am I." The argument ended with Isabella storming out, slamming the door behind her. Alexander sat alone in the silence, the weight of his choices pressing down on him. As Sophie's career continued to flourish, she was invited to appear on a popular talk show to discuss her journey from obscurity to success. Dressed in one of her own designs, a sleek, navy gown with intricate embroidery, she radiated confidence as she stepped onto the stage. The host, a charismatic woman known for her empathy, introduced Sophie with glowing praise. Our next guest is a self-made sensation, a designer who has taken the fashion world by storm. Please welcome Sophie Loren. The audience erupted in applause as Sophie took her seat. The host wasted no time diving into Sophie's story. Sophie, your journey is truly remarkable, the host began. You started as a maid, and now you're one of the most sought-after designers in the industry. How did you find the strength to chase your dreams? Sophie smiled, her hands resting gracefully in her lap. It wasn't easy, she admitted. There were moments when I doubted myself, especially after a difficult experience. But I realized that no one else could define my worth except me. I decided to stop waiting for someone to see my potential and start believing in it myself. The audience applauded again, moved by her words. Sophie went on to share her love for design, her late mother's influence, and her vision for using fashion as a way to empower others. As the interview aired, Alexander watched from his penthouse, the memories of their time together flooding back. He couldn't ignore the pang of regret that gnawed at him. Sophie's strength and determination had always been there. He had simply been too blind to see it. Alexander's relationship with Isabella continued to deteriorate. Her charm had long since faded, replaced by selfishness and manipulation. She cared little for his struggles, her focus solely on maintaining her lavish lifestyle. One evening, Alexander discovered a series of emails that revealed the extent of Isabella's betrayal. She had been funneling money from their joint accounts into a secret trust fund under her name. Worse, she had been using Alexander's connections to secure business deals for herself, all while undermining his reputation behind his back. When confronted, Isabella didn't even attempt to deny it. "What did you expect, Alexander?" she said with a smirk. "You're so busy trying to control everything that you didn't even notice what was happening right under your nose. That's on you." Alexander felt a surge of anger and humiliation, but more than that, he felt empty. Isabella had been a mistake, a glittering facade that masked nothing but greed and shallowness. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he had chosen her for all the wrong reasons. Months later, Sophie's success brought her back into Alexander's orbit in the most unexpected way. She was invited to design a collection for a charity gala hosted by one of Alexander's business rivals. The event, a grand affair at a historic mansion, promised to be the social event of the season. Sophie arrived at the gala with her head held high, her presence commanding attention. Her dress, a floor-length emerald gown with a dramatic train, turned heads as she entered the ballroom. Guests whispered excitedly, recognizing her as the rising star of the fashion world. Alexander spotted her from across the room, his breath catching in his throat. She was stunning, her confidence radiating in a way that made it impossible to look away. For a moment, he hesitated, unsure if he should approach her. But the pull was too strong. "Sophie," he said softly as he reached her side. "You look incredible." She turned to face him, her expression calm but unreadable. "Alexander," she said, her tone polite but distant. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I didn't expect to see you either," he admitted. "But I've been hearing a lot about you. Congratulations on all your success. You've earned it." "Thank you," Sophie said, her voice steady. "I worked hard for it." Alexander felt the weight of her words, a reminder of how he had underestimated her. "Sophie, I need to apologize for how I treated you. I was selfish and blind, and I didn't see how much I was hurting you. I'm so sorry." Sophie studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "I appreciate the apology, Alexander. But I've moved on. My life is so much better now, and I have no intention of looking back." Her words stung, but Alexander nodded. "I understand. I hope you know how much I regret what I did." Sophie gave him a small, polite smile. "Regret won't change the past. But I hope it changes you." With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Alexander standing alone in the bustling ballroom. As the evening unfolded, Sophie's designs stole the spotlight. Models glided through the room, showcasing her collection to thunderous applause. Even Alexander couldn't deny the brilliance of her work. It was elegant, bold, and utterly unforgettable. But the true shock of the evening came during the auction, when Sophie announced that all proceeds from her collection would go toward funding scholarships for underprivileged young women. The gesture earned her a standing ovation, solidifying her reputation not just as a designer but as a visionary. Alexander watched from the sidelines, his admiration for Sophie growing with every passing moment. She had become everything he had failed to see in her: a force of nature, a woman who refused to let the world define her. As the gala came to an end, Alexander returned to his penthouse, his thoughts consumed by Sophie. He couldn't help but reflect on the choices that had led him to this point. He had chosen wealth and status over genuine connection, and it had cost him the one person who truly cared for him. Sitting alone in his lavish living room, Alexander made a decision. He couldn't undo the past, but he could learn from it. He vowed to change, not for Sophie but for himself. He wanted to become the kind of man who deserved someone like her, even if it was too late to win her back. In the weeks following the gala, Sophie's career soared to even greater heights. Her designs were featured in top fashion magazines, and she received invitations to showcase her work at international events. She had become a household name, admired not just for her talent but also for her generosity and commitment to empowering others. Sophie thrived in her new life, but she remained grounded, never forgetting the struggles that had shaped her. She continued to mentor young women, sharing her story and encouraging them to pursue their dreams despite life's challenges. One of her mentor, a shy teenager named Mia, reminded Sophie of herself at a younger age. Mia had a natural talent for design but lacked the confidence to pursue it. Sophie took her under her wing, guiding her through the process of creating her first collection. "You have a gift, Mia," Sophie said one afternoon as they worked together in her studio. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The world needs to see what you can do." Mia beamed, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you, Sophie. I don't know where I'd be without you." Sophie smiled, her heart full. Moments like these reminded her of why she had fought so hard to rebuild her life. Meanwhile, Alexander began to reevaluate his own life. The fallout from his failed engagement with Isabella had left him disillusioned, but it also gave him the clarity he needed to make a change. For too long, he had measured his worth by his wealth and status, neglecting the values that truly mattered. He decided to take a step back from his high-powered lifestyle, focusing instead on giving back. He started volunteering at local charities, using his resources to support causes he believed in. At first, it felt foreign. He was used to being the center of attention, not working quietly in the background. But over time, he found a sense of fulfillment he hadn't known was possible. One day, while helping to renovate a community center, Alexander struck up a conversation with an older man who had been volunteering there for years. "You don't seem like the type who's done this before," the man said with a chuckle, wiping sweat from his brow. Alexander smiled sheepishly. "You're right. I'm new to this. But I'm trying to change." The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Change is never easy, but it's worth it. Just remember, it's not about proving anything to anyone else. It's about becoming the best version of yourself." The words stuck with Alexander, becoming a mantra he repeated to himself as he continued his journey of self-discovery. Months later, Sophie and Alexander's paths crossed once more at a charity event. This time, the atmosphere was different. Alexander was no longer the self-assured billionaire she had once known. He seemed quieter, more introspective, and genuinely interested in the event's purpose rather than its prestige. Sophie noticed him from across the room but chose to keep her distance. She had moved on from the hurt he had caused, and she wasn't sure she wanted to reopen that chapter of her life. But Alexander, spotting her as well, hesitated only briefly before approaching. "Sophie," he said softly, his voice tinged with nervousness. "It's good to see you again." She turned to face him, her expression calm but guarded. "Alexander, I didn't expect to see you here. I've been trying to get more involved with causes like this," he explained. "It's something I should have done a long time ago." Sophie nodded, acknowledging his efforts without offering encouragement. "That's good to hear." There was a moment of silence between them, the weight of unspoken words lingering in the air. Finally, Alexander spoke again. Sophie, I know I've apologized before, but I need you to know how much I admire what you've accomplished. You've built something incredible and I'm proud of you. Her expression softened slightly. Thank you, Alexander. That means a lot. I've also been working on myself, he continued. Trying to be a better person. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know. Sophie studied him for a moment, her heart torn between skepticism and compassion. I'm glad to hear that, she said finally. I hope you find what you're looking for. With that, she excused herself, leaving Alexander to watch her go once again. As Sophie's career continued to flourish, she reached a milestone that solidified her place in the fashion world, an invitation to host her own show at Paris Fashion Week. It was a dream come true, the culmination of years of hard work and determination. The show was a resounding success, with critics praising her innovative designs and the powerful message behind her collection. Sophie dedicated the show to her mother, honoring the woman who had inspired her to chase her dreams. In the days following the show, Sophie received a flood of messages from fans and industry professionals. Among them was a letter from Alexander. She hesitated before opening it, unsure of what to expect. The letter was heartfelt and sincere, acknowledging his past mistakes and expressing his hope for her continued success. Sophie smiled as she read the letter, appreciating the growth Alexander had shown. But she knew that her path was her own, and she didn't need anyone else's validation to move forward. Alexander, meanwhile, found peace in his new life. He continued to support charitable causes, using his resources to make a positive impact. Though he still thought of Sophie often, he respected her decision to move on and focused instead on becoming the man he wanted to be. One day, while volunteering at a shelter, he met a young boy who reminded him of himself at a younger age, ambitious but unsure of his place in the world. Alexander took the boy under his wing, mentoring him and helping him navigate the challenges of growing up. In guiding the boy, Alexander found a sense of purpose he had never known. He realized that true fulfillment came not from wealth or status but from the connections he made and the lives he touched. Years later, Sophie and Alexander crossed paths one final time at a mutual friends event. Both had grown in ways neither could have imagined, their journeys shaping them into the people they were meant to be. As they chatted briefly, there was no bitterness, no regret, only mutual respect and admiration. They parted ways with a shared understanding that their lives, though intertwined for a moment, had taken different but equally meaningful paths. And for Sophie, the encounter was a reminder of how far she had come, not just in her career but in her journey of self-discovery and empowerment. Paris Fashion Week had been a turning point for Sophie, not just professionally but personally. For the first time, she felt truly free of the weight of her past, free of the doubts that had once held her back, and free of the need for validation from anyone other than herself. She returned home with a renewed sense of purpose, ready to take her next steps. Sophie decided to expand her brand globally, launching initiatives that went beyond fashion. She started a mentorship program for young women aspiring to break into the industry, particularly those from disadvantaged backgrounds. The program, called Threads of Hope, quickly gained traction, with hundreds of applicants eager to learn from Sophie's story and expertise. One of the first participants, a young woman named Alina, shared a story that struck a chord with Sophie. Alina had grown up in foster care, using sewing as an escape from the instability in her life. When Sophie reviewed Alina's portfolio, she saw raw talent and passion, qualities that reminded her of her own early days. "You've got something special, Alina," Sophie said during one of their mentoring sessions. "Never let anyone tell you otherwise." Alina smiled, her eyes welling with tears. "I wouldn't even be here if it weren't for you. Thank you for believing in me." Moments like these reaffirmed Sophie's decision to use her platform for good. She wasn't just building a business, she was creating a legacy. Alexander, too, was carving out a new life for himself. His charitable work had become the centerpiece of his existence, and he found joy in the simplicity of helping others. He sold his sprawling penthouse, opting for a smaller, more modest home, and donated much of his wealth to causes close to his heart. One day, while visiting a youth center he had helped fund, Alexander was approached by a teenage boy named Liam. The boy was shy at first, but as Alexander sat with him, he began to open up. "I've always wanted to start my own business," Liam said. "But everyone says I'm dreaming too big." Alexander smiled, hearing echoes of his younger self in Liam's words. "Dreams are meant to be big," he said. "The only thing that matters is whether you're willing to work for them." Over time, Alexander became a mentor to Liam, guiding him through the process of starting a small lawn care business. When Liam secured his first clients, Alexander felt a surge of pride he hadn't experienced in years. Helping someone else succeed brought a sense of fulfillment that no amount of money or power could replicate. One day, Sophie received an unexpected invitation in the mail. It was for an exclusive charity gala celebrating leaders in philanthropy and social impact. The invitation came with a handwritten note from the event organizer. "Dear Sophie, your work has inspired countless people, and it would be an honor to have you as our guest of honor. We hope you can join us for this special evening." Sophie accepted the invitation, though she wasn't sure what to expect. She had attended many events over the years, but something about this one felt different. When the night of the gala arrived, Sophie entered the grand ballroom with her usual poise, her custom-designed gown turning heads as she moved through the crowd. She was greeted warmly by the event's host, who thanked her for her contributions to the industry and to society. As the evening progressed, Sophie mingled with guests, sharing stories of her journey and listening to theirs. She was in the middle of a conversation when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Sophie." She turned to find Alexander standing there, looking both nervous and hopeful. He was dressed simply, his once signature air of arrogance replaced by a quiet humility. "Alexander," Sophie said, her tone polite but guarded. "It's been a while." "It has," he replied, his hands fidgeting slightly. "I didn't expect to see you here." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "I could say the same. I was invited because of some of the projects I've been working on," he explained. "Charitable work, mostly. It's become a big part of my life." Sophie nodded, impressed despite herself. "That's good to hear." There was a pause before Alexander spoke again. "I know I've apologized before, but I want to say it again. Not just for how I treated you, but for how blind I was. You deserved so much better." Sophie studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You're right," she said finally. "I did. But I've moved on, Alexander. And I'm in a place now where I don't need closure from anyone else. I've found it within myself." Alexander smiled faintly, a mix of admiration and acceptance in his eyes. "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve every bit of happiness and success." Sophie returned the smile, a genuine warmth in her gaze. "Thank you. And I hope you find the same." With that, they parted ways, each walking in a different direction. For Sophie, the encounter felt like the final piece of her journey, a reminder of how far she had come and how much she had grown. As the years went by, Sophie continued to expand her influence, using her platform to advocate for inclusivity and empowerment. Threads of Hope grew into a global initiative, providing opportunities for thousands of young women to pursue their dreams. Sophie also launched a scholarship fund in her mother's name, honoring the woman who had inspired her resilience and creativity. At a press conference announcing the fund, Sophie spoke passionately about her vision for the future. "I believe that talent knows no boundaries," she said. "It doesn't matter where you come from or what challenges you've faced, everyone deserves a chance to shine." This fund is about creating those chances and helping the next generation of dreamers turn their visions into reality. The room erupted in applause, and Sophie felt a deep sense of fulfillment. She had turned her pain into purpose, proving that strength and determination could overcome even the greatest obstacles. Alexander, too, left a lasting legacy. Though his path had diverged from Sophie's, her influence remained with him, shaping the man he had become. He continued to mentor young entrepreneurs, using his resources to help them succeed. Over time, he earned a reputation not as a ruthless businessman, but as a compassionate leader who believed in lifting others up. One of his proudest moments came when Liam, the boy he had mentored, opened his own storefront. At the grand opening, Liam gave a heartfelt speech, thanking Alexander for his guidance and support. "You believed in me when no one else did," Liam said. And because of that, I'm standing here today. Thank you for showing me that dreams can come true." As the crowd applauded, Alexander felt a sense of pride and peace. He had found his purpose, and though it was different from the one he had once imagined, it was exactly what he needed. Years later, Sophie and Alexander crossed paths one final time at a community event. Both had built lives filled with meaning and purpose, their journeys intertwining briefly but profoundly. They exchanged a few words, their conversation light and easy, marked by mutual respect and understanding. As they parted ways, Sophie felt a quiet sense of closure. She no longer carried the pain of her past, only the lessons it had taught her. And for Alexander, seeing Sophie thrive was a reminder of the possibilities that came with change and redemption. In the end, Sophie and Alexander's story wasn't just about heartbreak or regret, it was about transformation. It was about finding strength in adversity, forging new paths, and using their experiences to inspire others. Sophie's name became synonymous with resilience, her work touching countless lives around the world. And though Alexander's journey had taken a humbler path, his impact was no less significant. Together, their stories stood as a testament to the power of growth, forgiveness, and the belief that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. And for Sophie, the lesson was clear. True strength comes not from what others see in you, but from what you choose to see in yourself. As Sophie's brand expanded globally, she began to explore avenues she hadn't imagined before. While her fashion house became synonymous with high-end design, Sophie wanted to make her work accessible to everyone. She launched an affordable collection called Everyday Elegance, designed for working-class women who wanted to feel confident and stylish without breaking the bank. The campaign for the collection quickly went viral. Sophie personally featured in the promotional material, highlighting her journey and the importance of making fashion inclusive. "We all deserve to feel beautiful," Sophie said in an interview with a leading magazine. "Growing up, I couldn't afford luxury, but that didn't stop me from dreaming. This collection is for the dreamers who work hard every day to make ends meet and still want to shine." The campaign was a massive success, and Everyday Elegance sold out within days of its launch. Sophie's ability to connect with people from all walks of life set her apart from other designers, making her a beloved figure worldwide. Meanwhile, Alexander had quietly become a force for good in his own way. The money he once used to fund lavish parties and extravagant purchases now went toward meaningful causes. He established the Sterling Foundation, focused on funding education and mentorship programs for underprivileged youth. Alexander took a hands-on role in the foundation, mentoring young entrepreneurs and providing resources to help them succeed. His efforts earned him recognition, but he shied away from the spotlight, preferring to focus on the work itself. One day, while speaking to a group of high school students, Alexander shared his journey. "I've made mistakes," he admitted. "I've hurt people and prioritized the wrong things. But I've learned that it's never too late to change. Success isn't about wealth or power, it's about the impact you have on others. And I hope all of you will take that to heart as you build your futures." The students erupted into applause, and Alexander felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced in his days as a billionaire bachelor. For the first time, he felt truly at peace with himself. Months later, Sophie received an intriguing proposal, a request from the Sterling Foundation to collaborate on a charity initiative. The idea was to create a scholarship fund for young women pursuing careers in fashion and design, combining Sophie's expertise with Alexander's resources. Sophie hesitated at first. She wasn't sure how she felt about working with Alexander again, even after all the time that had passed. But the cause was close to her heart, and she knew the impact they could make together was worth putting personal feelings aside. When she arrived at the first planning meeting, she found Alexander waiting for her in the conference room. He stood as she entered, his expression a mixture of nervousness and respect. "Sophie," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming." She shook his hand, her demeanor professional. "This is an important cause," she replied. "I'm happy to help." As the meeting progressed, Sophie was impressed by Alexander's dedication and thoughtfulness. He was no longer the arrogant man she had once worked for. He was genuinely invested in making a difference. While she remained cautious, she couldn't deny that he had changed. Over the next few weeks, Sophie and Alexander worked closely to develop the scholarship fund. They reviewed applications together, met with potential donors, and visited schools to promote the initiative. Despite their complicated history, they found common ground in their shared desire to empower others. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Sophie and Alexander found themselves alone in the conference room. The atmosphere was unexpectedly comfortable, a far cry from the tension that had once defined their interactions. "Thank you for doing this," Alexander said, breaking the silence. "You didn't have to, and I know it couldn't have been easy." Sophie looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "I didn't do it for you," she said. "I did it for the young women who need this opportunity. But I can see that you've changed, Alexander. And I respect that." Her words meant more to him than she realized. "I owe a lot of that to you," he admitted. "You showed me what real strength looks like. I just wish I had seen it sooner." Sophie smiled faintly, her gaze steady. "We can't change the past. But we can make sure we learn from it." As they left the building that night, Alexander couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. While he knew Sophie had moved on, he was grateful for the chance to work with her again, and to show her the man he had become. As the scholarship fund took off, Sophie began to see the impact of their work firsthand. One recipient, a young woman named Clara, had grown up in a small town much like Sophie's own. Clara's application had stood out for its heartfelt essay about using fashion to uplift marginalized communities. Sophie took Clara under her wing, mentoring her personally as she began her studies at a prestigious design school. Watching Clara's confidence grow reminded Sophie of her own journey, and she felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing she was helping to shape the next generation of designers. During one of their sessions, Clara looked at Sophie with a mixture of awe and gratitude. "You've changed my life," she said. "I hope I can be like you one day." Sophie smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You already are, Clara. Just keep believing in yourself." While Sophie focused on her men's, Alexander continued to expand the Sterling Foundation's reach. He launched a mentorship program for aspiring business leaders, pairing them with experienced professionals who could guide them through the challenges of entrepreneurship. One day, Alexander was approached by a young man named Marco, who had been struggling to secure funding for his tech startup. Marco's pitch was impressive, but his lack of connections had held him back. After hearing Marco's story, Alexander decided to invest in his company personally. He also introduced Marco to his network, helping him secure additional funding and partnerships. When Marco's company achieved its first major milestone, he invited Alexander to the celebration. During his speech, Marco singled Alexander out. "I wouldn't be here without Alexander Sterling," he said. "He believed in me when no one else did, and he gave me the tools to succeed. Thank you for changing my life." The applause that followed was deafening, and Alexander felt a surge of pride. Moments like these reminded him why he had chosen this path, and how much more fulfilling it was than the empty pursuits of his past. Years later, Sophie and Alexander found themselves at another charity gala, this time celebrating the 5th anniversary of the scholarship fund they had created together. The event was a resounding success, with numerous recipients sharing their stories of triumph and gratitude. As Sophie mingled with the crowd, she spotted Alexander across the room. He caught her eye and approached, a warm smile on his face. "Sophie," he said, his tone genuinely happy. "This is amazing. Look at what we've accomplished." She smiled back, nodding. "It is amazing. And it's just the beginning." They spent the evening reminiscing about the journey that had brought them to this point. While their paths had diverged, they both knew they had played a significant role in each other's growth. As the night came to an end, Alexander extended a hand. "Thank you, Sophie. For everything." She shook his hand, her smile genuine. "Thank you, Alexander. For finally seeing the bigger picture." They parted ways, both content with the lives they had built. For Sophie, the encounter was a reminder of how far she had come, and how much she had to look forward to. And for Alexander, it was a symbol of redemption and the power of change. In the end, Sophie and Alexander's story wasn't about romance. It was about growth, resilience, and the impact one person can have on another. Sophie became a global icon, her work inspiring millions to chase their dreams. Alexander, once blinded by arrogance, became a force for good, dedicating his life to empowering others. Their journeys, though separate, were forever intertwined, a testament to the power of transformation and the belief that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be. Sophie's name was now synonymous with empowerment, elegance, and transformation. Her story inspired people far beyond the fashion world, making her a global icon. After the overwhelming success of Threads of Hope and Everyday Elegance, Sophie decided to launch a new initiative, Project Radiance, a global platform aimed at uplifting underprivileged women through mentorship, education, and sustainable fashion production. Under Project Radiance, Sophie partnered with local artisans and communities around the world, using her platform to spotlight traditional craftsmanship. Her designs featured elements from diverse cultures, honoring the artisans behind the work and ensuring they were fairly compensated. Each collection told a story, weaving together the threads of heritage, resilience, and beauty. The impact was immediate. Women in remote villages were able to support their families through their craft, and young girls saw role models who showed them that their dreams were within reach. At the launch event for Project Radiance, Sophie delivered a powerful speech. "When I started this journey, I never imagined it would lead me here," she said, her voice steady and filled with emotion. "But the truth is, none of us succeed alone. We are shaped by the people who believe in us, who see our potential when we don't yet see it ourselves." Project Radiance is about paying that belief forward. Because when we lift each other up, we all rise. The applause that followed was deafening, and Sophie felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. She had built something far greater than a brand. She had built a legacy. At the same time, Alexander's work with the Sterling Foundation was gaining widespread recognition. His mentorship program had grown exponentially, with hundreds of young entrepreneurs benefiting from his guidance and resources. He had also expanded the foundation's focus, addressing issues like affordable housing, education reform, and mental health support for at-risk youth. One of Alexander's most ambitious projects was the creation of a leadership academy designed to nurture the next generation of socially conscious leaders. The academy offered scholarships, leadership training, and networking opportunities to students from underserved communities, equipping them with the tools to make a difference. During the academy's first graduation ceremony, Alexander addressed the students with a heartfelt speech. "I spent a long time chasing the wrong things," he admitted. "But life has a way of teaching us what truly matters. Seeing all of you here today gives me hope. Hope that the future will be brighter because of the choices you make, the values you stand for, and the people you inspire. Never forget the power you have to change the world." The students gave him a standing ovation, their admiration evident. For Alexander, moments like these validated his transformation. He had found a purpose that went far beyond himself, and it gave his life a depth he had never known. While Sophie's professional life was thriving, her personal life remained quieter. She had dated a few people over the years, but her focus had always been on her work. She had built a fulfilling life on her own terms, and she wasn't in a rush to change that. However, during a trip to Paris for another fashion showcase, Sophie met someone who caught her attention. His name was Daniel, a journalist who had been assigned to cover her event. Daniel was thoughtful, intelligent, and unafraid to challenge Sophie in ways she hadn't experienced before. Their connection was immediate but understated. They bonded over long conversations about art, culture, and the importance of using one's platform for good. Daniel admired Sophie's drive, while Sophie appreciated Daniel's grounded perspective on the world. Over time, their relationship deepened. Unlike her past experiences, this wasn't about grand gestures or fleeting passion. It was about mutual respect and shared values. Daniel became a steady presence in Sophie's life, supporting her work while encouraging her to find moments of rest and joy. For the first time in years, Sophie allowed herself to think about the possibility of a future with someone by her side. Though Sophie and Alexander rarely crossed paths, she was never far from his thoughts. Her name would surface in conversations, news articles, and social media posts, each reminder stirring a mix of admiration and regret. Alexander knew he had no place in her life now, but he couldn't help but reflect on the impact she had on him. One evening, as Alexander reviewed applications for his mentorship program, he came across a young woman whose story reminded him of Sophie's. She had worked as a maid to support her family, using her limited free time to pursue her dream of becoming a chef. Her essay described her determination to create a better life, not just for herself but for others like her. Moved by her story, Alexander decided to mentor her personally. As they worked together, he couldn't help but think of Sophie and the strength she had shown in rebuilding her life. "She changed everything for me," Alexander admitted to a close friend during a quiet dinner. "Even though I don't have a place in her world anymore, I'll always be grateful for what she taught me." The scholarship fund Sophie and Alexander had created together continued to thrive, its impact growing with each passing year. Many recipients went on to achieve remarkable success, becoming leaders in their respective fields and giving back to their communities. One of the most inspiring stories came from a young woman named Priya, who had used her scholarship to study textile design. Priya had grown up in a rural village in India, where her family struggled to make ends meet. The scholarship had given her the opportunity to attend a prestigious design school, and she had since launched her own sustainable fashion line that supported local artisans. At a gala celebrating the fund's 10th anniversary, Priya gave an emotional speech. "This scholarship didn't just change my life," she said, her voice trembling. "It changed the lives of everyone in my village. Because of Sophie Laurent and Alexander Sterling, I was able to follow my dreams and lift others up along the way. Thank you for believing in me." As Priya left the stage, Sophie and Alexander exchanged a glance from opposite sides of the room. In that moment, they both felt the weight of what they had accomplished together, a legacy that transcended their past. Years later, Sophie and Alexander crossed paths at a quiet coffee shop in New York City. It was a chance encounter. Sophie was in town for a meeting, and Alexander had been visiting a nearby youth center. They greeted each other warmly, their shared history evident in the way they smiled. After ordering their drinks, they sat down at a corner table, the conversation flowing easily despite the years that had passed. "You've done incredible things, Sophie," Alexander said, his tone genuine. "I always knew you were meant for more, but what you've built, it's beyond anything I could have imagined." Sophie smiled, her gaze steady. "Thank you, Alexander. And I've heard about the work you've been doing. It's impressive. You've come a long way." They talked for hours, reminiscing about the journey that had brought them to this point. While their paths had diverged, they both acknowledged the role they had played in each other's growth. As they parted ways, Alexander extended a hand. "Thank you, Sophie. For everything." She shook his hand, her smile kind. "Thank you, Alexander. For finding your way." In the years that followed, Sophie and Alexander's contributions continued to ripple outward. Sophie's designs and initiatives transformed industries, while Alexander's mentorship programs and foundation changed countless lives. Though their lives rarely intersected, their shared impact was undeniable. For Sophie, the journey was about proving to herself and the world that she was capable of greatness. For Alexander, it was about redemption and the realization that true wealth came from the lives he touched. Together, they proved that even the most unexpected connections can lead to profound change. And in the end, their story wasn't just about heartbreak, success, or redemption. It was about the power of transformation and the belief that we all have the capacity to grow, heal, and create a better world.